Okay, well, thank you all for joining me this morning and taking the time out of your busy schedules to join me. And, hopefully I'll be able to share some insights and you could learn a few things there. So my name's Dianne Capulong and I'm from Motor Trades Care. A couple of housekeeping rules before we start the webinar. Just a heads up, just in case you missed the message at the beginning, this webinar will be recorded for training and education purposes as well. That way you do have a copy of it. So if you want to share it amongst your peers, staff, or maybe someone in need that needs the message as well, you're able to do that. So we'll be able to release that after the webinar. And also for the purpose of time as well, all the mics will be muted. So if you have any questions at all, feel free to pop it down in the chat, the QA chat there. And at the end of the webinar, I'll be more than happy to answer any questions. Now, I do encourage you to refrain from providing, any personal in-depth information just for confidentiality. If you do have any questions you want to ask about personal injuries, workers' compensation that's tailored to your situation, feel free to also reach out to me post the webinar as well. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. Alrighty, so first I wanted to introduce you to myself, get to know a little bit about me and my background before we proceed. So as I mentioned, my name's Dianne and I'm from Motor Trades Care. So I come from a big background in financial services, over 8 years, jumping the gun there. So I started off in general and personal insurance, and then I made my way through to workers' compensation. So I started off as a case manager, worked for a few big insurers there, went into the specialized segment, which is the psychological and high complexity claims. And then I merged into the return to work space for a large employer. And since there, learned the tricks of the trade, and now I'm doing consulting, and that leads me to my path here at Motor Trades Care. Now, besides that, who are we here at Motor Trades? So what we specialize in our services, and I will go into this a little bit more in depth a bit later, but we specialize in work health and safety. So we've got our Protect and Care program. So that's for identifying risk management within the business and ongoing care to help maintain that for our clients as well. So that's one segment of it. And then there's our care and recover. So I do take care of that. That's our support sector there. So I manage the injury management for my clients and also personal injuries and implementation of policies and procedures within the workplace. So that comprises MTC as a whole. Now, in saying that, we are in affiliation with Motor Trades Association. So a lot of you here today are probably members, so I welcome you, and for our non-members, I also welcome you as well. Thank you again for joining. So with Motor Trades Association of New South Wales, we are a sister company, so a subsidiary of them as well. So we work hand in hand, and together we form the voice of the automotive industry. And in regards to iCare as well, so we are partnered with iCare, and we are working with them to better knowledge with the automotive industry, with the work health and safety practices, and also injury and rehabilitation as well. Okay, so what we're going to discuss today, so just a bit of an overview. So the aim of today's session is to share that knowledge and insight with you on how to effectively manage workplace injuries and personal injuries within the workplace as well. And just so you can get a further understanding about your return to work obligations, whether or not, you are the employee sitting here or today, or you're the employer, maybe you're starting out or in business, or maybe you're going through something and you want some more informed advice around that. That's what the aim of the session is today. So the objective is to identify the gap. So I want you guys to be thinking of situations and how that's affected you, and, possibly provide you with that right guidance. So that way you can implement the right strategies for yourself, your business, or your peers to help in regards to the recovery of an injury in the workplace or to prevent it as well. So the main takeaways from our session today is one, understanding the common injuries in the workplace. Also understanding who's actually involved when someone gets injured. What happens when someone is injured? What's your part and role in that as well? And your role in the process. So your obligations, again, whether if you're an employer, return to work coordinator, or injured worker as well. Importance of early intervention with injury management, and of course, how we could assist you here at Motor Trades Care as well. Okay, so I'm going to open up the floor here. Okay, I'm going to ask you a question. So please feel free to have a look at the poll. I'm going to pop this up right now. So what I want to know before we talk about the common injuries, in your experience, whether you've gone through this yourself, you know someone that's gone through it, or you're currently assisting someone, you might be stuck in a bit of a kerfuffle, as we say. I want to know, what have you experienced is the most common injuries in your lifetime? Now, 3 options there: upper body, lower body, and back. So please pop in your answers there so I could get a bit of a gauge before we talk about that segment. So just to give some clarity, as you can see, upper body, we're talking about hands, wrists, forearm, arms, shoulders. Okay. And then lower body, we're looking at feet, ankles, legs, hips, trunk as well. And back, musculoskeletal, joints, bone structure, nervous system. So I'll give you guys a second to pop in your answers. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for popping in your answers there. What I'll do now is I'll publish the results there so that way you guys can have a look. So as we can see, a lot of you guys have said that upper body is quite common. So very interesting to see. And if you're part of the automotive industry, that is a very common place of injury as well. So before we bring up the statistics, this information is derived from the Safe Work Australia statistics from 2021 and 2022 for serious injuries and fatalities. Okay, so number 1, if you have voted for upper body, you're not the only ones in the room that is also experiencing that. That is actually ranked the number 1 most common for serious injuries and with serious injuries there. Okay, so in saying that, upper body. So if you're in the automotive industry, very common. If you have a mechanic, you know, you're constantly on the tools. You're working on one car. You know, if you're an accessory fitter, you're constantly working with things, and sometimes, you know, gloves could be uncomfortable, even though you should wear it. You know, you might slip it off, and then one hit with a hammer, then you could cause an injury. So the common injuries that we do see with upper body is lacerations. We also get fractures as well, quite a few fractures, sprains, especially in the shoulder region. Okay, so we see rotator cuff tears, bursitis, tendonitis, and issues like that. So overall, before we also go into the nature of the injuries as well, what we often see is acute injuries, which is trauma-based injuries. So what we like to call in insurance terms, frank incidents. So something happened in the workplace, it caused an injury. And then chronic. So that's long-term injuries there. And you're also looking at degenerative. So it might be hereditary, you know, your family's had it in the past. So that's the 2 main types of injuries that usually occur there as well. So second to that, we do also have lower limbs. So if you did vote for that, that is also very, very common. So very common if, you know, you're working and you're standing in awkward positions, and you know, you're doing different types of movements. And what we constantly see as well is within the older generation, what we see, because osteoarthritis, if you've been a mechanic working in the trade for more than 10, 15 years, you know, a lot of work and intense work, manual labor, could also make things worse there for you. So what we constantly see is knee injuries. That's quite common, and could be, again, lacerations, fractures. All those things constitute with the lower limbs. Now, lastly, we also have back. Now, not sure if you know, but just within the spinal region as well, we do have 23 discs. And out of them, you could have a ruptured disc, a slip disc, you could end up getting a hernia, and that could cause a lot of issues there for you. And what we constantly see, especially with mechanics there as well, is, again, through long periods of doing their job, throughout the course of time, they could cause those issues there. So very important to take care of yourself. You do only have one spine and one back, and your musculoskeletal system is pretty much comprises your body as well. So those are the three main injuries. Now, with the mechanism of injuries, what we do have the tendency of seeing there as well is body stress. So that's the main cause of injuries occurring in the workplace from what we could see. So body stress could be, again, prolonged standing, sitting, being in awkward positions, constantly putting stress onto your body, and that could cause issues there for you in the long term. Now, if you are interested in knowing more about the SPICs and the specs, we actually are coming out with a common injuries publication. So I'll do a deep dive further into these injuries as well. Okay. So let's talk about who's involved. All right. So there's two categories. We have our internal stakeholders, so people that you're probably familiar with, and you might actually classify as, and also external stakeholders. Now, the internal stakeholders here, we'll start off with the obvious, the injured worker. Now, what we tend to forget is behind the injured worker, you have their families involved. They also might have legal representation as well. We often see that with long-term claims, or in the case as well, they're looking for a lump sum payout. So legal representatives would be involved there as well. Now, employers, depending on the type of business that you run or you work in, you could be small, so your mum and dad company, so you could be a dealer principal, have your own business and might only have a couple of employees, to medium to larger businesses where you could have HR, you could have supervisors, managers involved. You could also have a union representative as well. So there's quite a few people with employers as we constitute there. And also the return to work coordinator. So all businesses do have an appointed, whether or not that's your full-time role or a partial role there. The return to work coordinator helps key and tie all the liaising with different parties and represents the employer as well. So they're a big part to the mix. Okay. Now, let's talk about external stakeholders there. So with external stakeholders, you might not have much contact with them. If you've been going through an injury, you most likely would. But if you're someone that's taking care of an injury, or you're in the workplace and your job is to manage it, you might not have access to these people. So it's important to know who's behind the scenes when it comes to an injury. So first is medical health providers. So we're looking at general practitioners, specialists as well, and also on the insurer side of things, we have an IME, so an independent medical examiner. We also have a medical support panel as well that helps with determining certain treatments that's causable, or also, what's effective as well. Now, we also have allied health providers. Now, these people are the forefront, especially when a muscular injury occurs. So the easiest way to remember it is they're the treaters. So you're looking at your physios, your EPs, so your exercise physiologist, chiropractors, you also got your psychologist, you got your counselors. That team there will help the workers with their ongoing treatment and help them go back to pre-injury duties. So they report to their GP of how their treatment is actually going. Now, it's important to note as well that with workers' compensation and CTP claims, the provider needs to be a CIRA accredited provider, not a private provider there. So simply, if you go get treatment, you just ask, Are you CIRA accredited, or do you work with workers' compensation claimants? Apologies there. And that way the insurance will be able to cover it. So that's important to know. And with that, case managers. So there's a lot behind case managers that you don't necessarily see, and the team behind them supporting them. Now, the first thing I want to make note as well, you might be familiar with eye care. Raise your hand if you've dealt with eye care before. So with eye care, just to give you a heads up, lots of people dealt with eye care. Very good, very good. So just to let you know, you might be familiar with them because when you get your bill, especially now it's end of June, end of financial year, right? So you'll be getting invoice for your premiums. A lot of people are familiar with them that way, or you might have dealt with them because a worker or yourself might have had an injury. So just to let you know, eye care deals with the premium side of things, okay? So about your policy. And with that as well, you have nominated insurers. So they take care of the case management side of things, two different things, okay? So with insurer, might be EML, just to name a few, QBE, Allianz, just a few providers there. So they actually take care of the case management and the injury management side of things. Now, the case manager coordinates everything and, implements the decisions. But behind the case manager, you have a few people involved as well. So you've got your technical specialist. Now, their role in that as well is to help with the liability decisions. So the investigation process. Their role is also to help out with the legality side of things. And then you have your IMS, so your injury management specialist. They deal with the medical side of things. So reviewing surgeries, treatments, all that stuff, they take care of that. And then you have your team leader as well. So they oversee all three parties there. So behind the case manager, there's a lot of people that coordinate and help with the decision-making of a claim there as well. Okay. And last of all is rehab providers. Now, depending on the nature of the claim, they might be involved or not. Okay. So usually the case manager would recommend them once if there's time loss on a claim, if the worker's off for example, more than a week, or the predicted, depending on the injury, recovery is a lot longer, or potentially over the 13 weeks, then the rehab provider is involved. So essentially, they're an extended arm to the return to work consultant there as well. So the return to work coordinator, they'll be able to actually go to the medical case conferences, attend specialist appointments, help out with appointments, and check in with the worker as well, just to make sure that everyone's up on par with the return to work plan. So that's their role in the mix. Okay. Now, what do you do when someone gets injured? Okay, so what we've done is we've done a 3-step process there, just so we have a further insight. Now, first thing, when an incident occurs, when an injury occurs, the worker needs to advise their superior. Okay, so their superior that's on shift, and if this, might be after hours, or the mechanic might be on call and they don't have anyone there, give whoever's closest a call there as well. All right. Now, in that case, if there is any, so for example, laceration, first aid kit is required as well. So provide that first aid, and if necessary, what I would recommend as well, getting the first aid officer to come and help provide medical assistance. Now, the most important thing, if there were a serious incident, if there was a fatality or a dangerous incident, you must call 000 and also notify Safe Work as well, New South Wales. So I'm going to give you a bit of insight into what we classify as serious injury. So serious injuries, what we look into that is, just to simplify it, inpatient. So if your worker gets called into the hospital and has to stay there, you got to notify Safe Work. Amputation, serious head injuries, eye injuries, serious burns. That's just a few examples there. When it comes to dangerous incidents, that's also classified. You also need to report near misses as well. So just a brief overview, that would be if there was electrocution that was involved, if you had a leakage of gas, a spillage there, things like that, that will also be reported as well. So I will be sending out after this webinar as well. So if you don't know the full list of what needs to be notified, not to worry. Again, I will be sending that out to you as well, so you understand. So that's the first response. Now, the call to action, this is the important part. This is the documentation side of things. So number one, what you need to do is make sure that your worker lodges an incident. That's very important, okay? And you pop that down in your your injury register, just to make sure that everything's up to date, and that way you could begin the investigation process to prevent that from happening again. And of course, if there is an injury there, you must notify your insurance as well within 48 hours. So make sure that they do know. Now, the last pillar is support. So if there is any medical assistance that's required, please get your worker, or if you are the worker, please go seek medical advice and treatment. So go see your local GP and get that information, especially a certificate of capacity. That's very important as well. And providing support that way, ensures that there isn't any further issues, and then you could provide that. It gives you a bit of an insight to what's actually happening there as well. Now, also suitable duties, very, very important. So if the worker is able to do suitable duties, even they're a mechanic and, they might not be able to do their normal servicing or what they usually do, get them to help out in the office, get them to help out doing with inspections or anything within the workplace as well. It's better to have them, and it's proven that it's better to have them in the workplace and recovering at work. So with that, you also need to make a suitable duties plan as well, just to show as well that you are supporting the worker, and then you could continuously develop that. And also, finally, again, continuous support, that's very important. So being involved in the early stages of an injury is essential to provide the worker and also your business that support to understand how to manage the injury as well. Okay, so let's talk about employee obligations. So what we need to do is understand what you need to do before an injury occurs, what you need to be set up in place. So the first thing you need to have is make sure you have an active workers' insurance policy. There are penalties in New South Wales, so make sure that your policy is up to date and your premiums are paid. Then you also have to make sure that you have displays of if you are injured in the workplace poster within your workplace. I recommend as well common areas such as the kitchen, places, the front reception as well. So that way, if in the case the worker's not able to access the superior, the manager, they'll be able to contact the return to work coordinator straight away. Now, ensure that you do have a return to work program. That's essential as well. It needs to be reviewed every 2 years, and it needs to be within the legislative requirements. Now, with the acronyms there, so WCA stands for Workers' Compensation Act, the 1987 Act. So that's the original Workers' Compensation Act there. And then you have the next one is the Workplace Injury Management and Workers' Compensation Act 1998. So that's the revised version there, and also the Workers' Comp Regulation. So you need to make sure that your program complies to that as well. And of course, most important is work health and safety, just making sure that with your work and health and safety side of things, everything is up to date and continuously maintained as well. Okay, now what to do after an injury occurs. As I mentioned, let your insurer know that there's been a workplace injury. If it is serious, again, please notify Safe Work as well. Now, develop a recovery at work plan as well. I'll also explain to you the difference between an injury management plan, because you also need to contribute with that. Now, for the insurers they are required to make an injury management plan when a claim comes to them. So it pretty much states personalized obligations between the employer, worker, and also the insurer as well. So they would send that out. And then the return to work plan, that's in regards to suitable duties within the workplace, okay? And that's something that you guys are in charge of. So that's the difference between the two. We do often see that a lot of people do get confused with that. So I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, and then also with the collection and sharing medical and health information, just making sure that you're not sharing that with people that's not affiliated to the injury, and providing the right information to the insurer to support the claim as well. Okay, and also provide assistance with common law and recovery claims. So just a quick example there. Let's say your worker was contracted to work at a different site, had the injury there. It may constitute, for example, public liability. So there might be further questions that the insurer will ask about how it happened, where it happened, and how it affected the worker as well. And lastly, when you provide suitable duties, making sure that it is aligned with the certificate of capacity, so the restrictions around that as well. Okay, now what we also tend to forget that is workers also have obligations. So yes, they are injured, but they're also responsible for their injury. So this is what they're responsible for. One, participating in developing an injury management plan. So in the beginning stages of lodging a claim, they'll be speaking with a case manager, and the case manager will run through what they need to do to make sure that documentation, treatment, everything's up to par. So they need to contribute to that plan as well. And with that, most importantly, before that even were to occur, to let the employer know that an injury has happened. You know, sometimes we do see this happen where the worker doesn't tell the employer, goes straight to the insurer, and then weeks later, the worker's still working, they don't have capacity, they shouldn't be working, but the employer's late to know, which is a very big no-no. The employer should be the first to know because they need to understand, if there's any amendments that need to be changed within the workplace to support the worker as well. Otherwise, it's a risk and hazard for them. And communicating with all relevant stakeholders. So there's a lot of people, as we all saw, there's a lot of people involved in the mix, and that could be quite overwhelming. So it's important that the communication is up to par and the worker is letting all the relevant people know what's happening in regards to their injury. If there is any issues though, to also let the insurer know that there is issues and any treating party involved, so that way they could troubleshoot it and they could raise that as well to make sure that the return to work and the recovery process is smooth, and also making reasonable effort to participate. And, if you're an employee here, you might have had a situation like this where maybe the worker wasn't as engaged, or maybe you didn't know what type of suitable duties to provide them, and they're not used to it, and they're doing office duties, and they're not really engaged in what's happening. It's important that, they do participate in those duties, and if there's any issues, again, report it, right? And with that as well, again, actively participate in the return to work plan. So that's what you've comprised, and also provide authorization for you guys to communicate with the nominated treating doctor, so the GP that's involved in the claim as well. They hold a big piece to the puzzle because they'll help coordinate the injury and the treatment plan for the worker. Now, in that case, just a heads up, if you didn't know already, the worker does have the ability to choose their own GP, but if they do want to change it, they've got to let their insurer know and provide reasoning to why. Okay, so let's look at the return to work coordinator. Essentially, the return to work coordinator is responsible for ensuring the employer meets their obligations. So if you're considered under category 1, which, as you can see, if you pay over $50,000 in premium, you've got more than 20 employees, you have to have a designated return to work coordinator. So that is purely their role within the business. And you could also have that externally as well, but you need to have someone appointed for that. In category 2, so essentially if you're below that mark, you don't need to have an appointed return to work coordinator. You could, appoint someone within the business, but it doesn't need to be their designated role. Again, just to emphasize as well, it could be internally or externally outsourced with an alternative arrangement. Now, in saying that, if you haven't yet, please update your if you are injured work poster. So that's the new one that Sarah has been able to provide. We'll be able also to add a link so that way you could download that and fill out the return to work coordinator details and post that around your businesses as well. Okay. So to tie in all, today and what we've learned about early intervention, it's very important to be involved, right? As I mentioned there, you do play a very important role in the recovery and the process of recovery for the injured worker. So with that, as we all know, when someone's injured as well, that could significantly impact the productivity, and that could be a loss within the organization. You can end up losing business. And being involved at the beginning, building that level of trust, helping the worker as much as you can, providing those suitable duties will help them reduce the cost of hiring and finding a replacement, especially in this industry today. There is a skills shortage, as we are already aware of. So it's important to take care of your employees as they also take care of you. And that also goes for employees as well, to also work with your employer to find the best solution so that way you can return back to pre-injury duties. So it benefits everyone in the workplace. Okay, so now that you've got a full overview about your obligations and what's the process behind injury management, I want to talk a little bit about how we can help you here at Motor Trades Care. Now, with the Recovery at Work program, as I mentioned earlier on, it is required that your business has that. It's quite an in-depth process, and that's something that we do provide. So we could actually create and tailor a customized return to work program for your businesses. So that's a policy procedure. We can help implement that as well and provide you with support, because implementing something new, especially if you're not familiar with that as well, that could be quite a big change in your organization. Training up the leaders of the organization, your staff, that's something that we could also help you put in place as well. Importantly, as this whole webinar has been about, is providing support and guidance. So yes, a lot about return to work is about the worker and helping and supporting them, but it's also just as important, if not more, to support employers such as yourselves, if you're an employer watching this today, to provide you with the right tools and resources to help support you when someone's injured, and to also, most importantly, prevent injuries from happening in the workplace by providing a work health safety culture, right? That's something we could help you with. And lastly, liaising with all stakeholders. Now, as you saw, there's so many people involved. And as you may have heard this saying, too many cooks spoil the broth, right? Being as you could hire us as well as your designated return to work coordinator, we could liaise and sort out everything from the minute an injury occurs, from the very end as well, which could also help you save in the cost of your premiums, especially with the cost of living as well. So that way you could focus on what you do best by making the business, making the revenue, supporting your businesses, while also providing that extended hand to your workers to help and support them through recovery as well. Alrighty, so that essentially wraps up today's webinar.